Hello, everyone. Welcome. Happy Pride Month. I'm Rachel Siegel, the Director of Strategic Programs at the Jewish Women's Foundation of New York. Thank you for joining us today from all over the world. The Jewish Women's Foundation of New York identifies and uplifts transformational women leaders. We call them Jewels, Jewish entrepreneurial women executives and leaders. Women who lead organizations and the field in addressing some of the world's most pressing issues in and beyond the Jewish community. Welcome back to our monthly Crown Jewel conversation series, where we learn from and interact with these bold and creative leaders. We support both visionary women leaders and visionary Jewish women philanthropists. When we say philanthropists, we're talking about those who give with intention, whether it's those who give thousands of dollars or those who give $25. Together, we are activating our potential to create positive change. We introduce women, like many of us on the screen, to dozens of women, most of whom we've never heard of, who are using their Jewish values and a gender lens to solve intractable problems anywhere in the world. When you support JWFNY, you not only support 40 organizations run by phenomenal women, you are supporting a movement. We have created a space where those doing the work on the ground share their successes and challenges with like-minded philanthropists, donors, activists, supporters of any kind, to learn about issues relevant to their own desires to make a difference in the world. This past year has been a big one for us at JWFNY. We just kicked off our 25th anniversary with a bang at our celebration gala in April. Many of you who are on the call were there. We announced the members of cohort 4 of the collective, women from around the world working on issues such as child labor and child marriage, ordaining Orthodox women rabbis, creating more inclusive Jewish communities, and much more. If you missed it, you can find the video recordings on our website. We have also expanded our advocacy portfolio this year. To name a few examples of issues that we have supported recently, on May 17th, following the leaked Supreme Court decision in Dobbs v. Jackson Women's Health Organization, JWFNY joined 150 other organizations to co-sponsor, including Keshet, by the way, to co-sponsor the Jewish Rally for Abortion Justice in Washington, D.C. Just this week, we signed on to a letter to support the Equality Amendment in New York State, which would begin the process for amending our state constitution to prohibit discrimination on the basis of race, color, ethnicity, national origin, disability, or sex, including pregnancy and pregnancy outcomes, sexual orientation, and gender expression. Finally, we're proud to co-sponsor an event live from the front lines, how we fight back against voter suppression in the states right now, in partnership with the Workers' Circle and the Center for Common Ground, and that is taking place on Tuesday, June 14th, from 7 to 8 p.m. Eastern. The registration link will be put in the chat. We support leaders throughout the year, but our conversation today will allow you to get to know one of these women in depth. Idit Klein is a national leader for social justice with more than 25 years of experience in the nonprofit sector. Since 2001, she has served as the leader of Keshet, the National Organization for LGBTQ Equality in Jewish Life. Idit built Keshet from a local organization with an annual budget of $42,000 to a national organization with an annual budget of over $4 million. Under her leadership, Keshet has supported tens of thousands of rabbis, educators, and other leaders to make LGBTQ equality a communal value and imperative. Idit also spearheaded the creation of leadership development programs for queer Jewish teens and mobilized Jewish communities to help defeat a proposed constitutional amendment to ban same-sex marriage and advance transgender rights in Massachusetts. She is also the executive producer of Keshet's documentary film, Hineni, coming out in a Jewish high school. If, like Idit, you believe, and JWFNY, excuse me, you believe that LGBTQ equality is a Jewish communal value and is critical, then you are in the right place today. After Rachel and Idit chat, we will open the floor to questions. So please write down any questions that you have so that you will remember them, rather than writing them in the chat, because you yourself will have the chance to ask them. For now, we've muted everyone to avoid any background noise. And now I'm thrilled to introduce the president of JWFNY, Rachel Weinstein.
Thank you, Rachel. And hello, Idit. I'm so happy to see you and be in conversation with you today. You know, one thing I think I've learned as I've interviewed all of you jewels who are in our network and social entrepreneurs, is you live your passions. Your work and your identity are so intertwined. So I'd love to start at the beginning and just ask you the most general of questions of, you know, what has made you the leader and activist that you are? Why are you who you are?
Sure. Great to be with you, Rachel, and great to be with all of you from the Jewish Women's Foundation of New York. Thank you for inviting me to be here today. So I can take your question very literally, because I am someone for whom really my most pivotal experiences in shaping my leadership all happened to me as a child. Starting with, I immigrated to the States with my parents just before my second birthday from Israel. So I was, you would think I was an immigrant kind of pre-consciousness and pre-memory. And yet my first memories are of being keenly aware that I was from somewhere else, and that I was somehow different from others in this country. And that was reinforced fascinatingly by my kindergarten teacher, who took it upon herself to inform the class that my status was legal alien, which of course the kids found very funny, and which I remember kind of pretending to laugh at, but of course, was stigmatizing and, did not feel good at all. So that was an early experience of, feeling othered and feeling sensitive to the way that others were marginalized in different ways. So kind of that was, a piece of the early journey. Another really critical moment for me was when I was just 4 years old. I asked my great aunt why she had blue numbers on her arm. And all she told me was that when she was 18, bad men took her away and that they tattooed her arm, and that happened because she was a Jew. And that's all she said. But that was enough, not surprisingly, to terrify me. And yet, and I'm very grateful for this, along with the profound sense of really harrowing terror and vulnerability that I felt, because of course I knew that I was a Jew. And so I was convinced that at that moment, the bad men were racing through the streets of New Bedford, Massachusetts, where we lived, on their way to get me too. But along with that sense of terror, came this really fierce resolve and determination and clarity, more than anything, that I needed to do whatever I could do to change the world so that there would be no bad men. And I feel like that sort of opened the door for me to walk through and embark on a life in which, I felt like the only thing that made sense for me to do was to do work that was about advancing justice and creating a better world. Lastly, not my last experience on my journey to leadership, but my last really pivotal experience that is something that I really cherish, happened actually on my first day in Orthodox day school, which was in 3rd grade when I transferred to this school. And on my first day, my Chumash teacher, Rabbi Yechiel Dubovik, put a Chumash in front of me, one of the books of the Torah, and he pointed at the page and he said, "Here is the main story." And then he said, and he pointed at on the left-hand margin, he said, "And here," and then he pointed below and he said, "And here are what 2 different people have to say about that story. And you should know sometimes they disagree with each other. And sometimes I disagree with them. And sometimes you may disagree with them. You might even disagree with me, but remember, I always want to know what you think. So there I was, growing up in a secular Israeli family in New Bedford, Massachusetts, at an Orthodox Jewish day school. And, I didn't think of it in these terms at the time, but I think emotionally, I felt like I was being handed the keys to Jewish tradition, and I was being told, this is yours, and you belong to it, and it belongs to you, and you are inextricably a part of this thing together. So that, for me, gave me this really deep sense of belonging and ownership. And I think combined with sort of the sensitivity to outsidership that came from being an immigrant, and the commitment to justice and sense of responsibility that came from learning about the Holocaust at such a young age and having all of my grandparents be survivors, I think all of those pieces together led me to both feel a commitment to justice and feel like that was work I needed to do as a Jew, and that I had a responsibility to stand up as a Jew, and that no one could take that away from me.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. And what a gift as an 8-year-old to have someone, a mentor say that to you. And it's also one of the things that I love about our Jewish values is how we're encouraged to challenge and debate. And it's all in this pursuit of something better. So I think that's so beautiful.
And a man with a black hat, black coat, and black beard at that.
To a girl,
Mm-hmm.
which, could have gone so many different ways. So really that's pretty special. As Rachel said, Keshet works for the full equality of LGBTQ Jews and our families in Jewish life. And you have been at the helm for 2 decades. You've grown this organization. I think I did the math, and it's like by 1,000% from where you started. But I thought we should maybe set the stage, because so much evolution has happened in the last 20 years. And can you just frame it for us and share with us, what was the climate like around LGBTQ issues when you started with Keshet?
Absolutely. I really love this question because I often think about how much things have changed just in our little Jewish world in the United States in the last 20 years, because for me, that's a huge source of hope, at a time in which, of course, there's a lot of reason to grasp for hope. So when I started building Keshet, LGBTQ issues were just absolutely not on the radar screen of the vast majority of Jews. When I would tell people what I did for work, people literally didn't understand what I was talking about. People would say to me, so I don't quite understand. Now, how is that? That's a Jewish issue? You're doing that in the Jewish community? How is that relevant to the Jewish community? People just didn't understand that LGBTQ Jews are a part of the Jewish community, and that there's homophobia and transphobia in the Jewish community, and that there's work for us to do, and that the Jewish community has a responsibility to all of us to create a community of belonging and a community in which all of us can feel at home. So much of the early work was just really proving the basic relevance of the need for such work and for such change within Jewish life. And of course, I never get that question anymore. I get other questions, and there's other kinds of resistance and opposition. But there's no question around how is this a Jewish issue? Is this relevant? So that's been just a monumental change. Another major difference is that in our early years, when we started doing trainings in different kinds of Jewish communal institutions, we would consistently be told, please just talk about the G and the L. Please just focus on gay and lesbian, because bisexuality is confusing and we're not ready for transgender. Those exact words, bisexuality is confusing and we're not ready for transgender, I must have heard them, I don't know, hundreds of times over the years. And there was just a real resistance to engaging kind of beyond what people saw as kind of the basics and the basics of a really kind of binary understanding of sexual orientation. For the last several years, and that lasted, I would say, through probably 2012, 14 or so, until about several years ago. Nowadays, again, we never hear that anymore. And in fact, the majority of our requests for trainings, particularly in kind of progressive urban settings, but also in some other parts of the country, the majority of our requests for trainings are to focus on gender diversity. Because in so many Jewish communities, like in the world, we're seeing kids at younger and younger ages come out as trans and non-binary, and so the need for awareness and the need for understanding is being pushed up from within communities. A related additional really significant difference is that for years when we started out, there was total opposition to our engaging directly with young people, meaning anyone younger than 18 really, and with anyone who works with young people. And people would say to us explicitly, we don't want you talking with kids, and there's no need for you to talk with educators who work with kids, because if kids hear about this kind of stuff, they might get confused. If kids hear about this, they might want to experiment, and let's wait till they're older. It really isn't, these issues really aren't relevant until kids get to college. And in fact, our first funding from the Jewish Federation in Boston came from the Young Adult Task Force. And for years, we were only funded, not just through our federation, but through a lot of Jewish funding sources around the country, through various young adult funding pools. And so I used to try to joke, and for a long time, no one got the joke that, all of the queer Jews of the world were so grateful for our being forever frozen, in the young adult age. And, people didn't really get the joke until finally they did. And then, and then we stopped being funded by that funding stream. So, So it took a long time before there was openness and a recognition to the fact that, of course, LGBTQ people exist at every age and are a part of the world, and that therefore it's relevant to people in all stages of Jewish life. So that's been a major change. And lastly, I'll share that people often find it hard to remember this or even believe this, but for example, when marriage equality first came to Massachusetts, which was the first state in the country where same-sex couples could get married back in 2004, the Jewish community in Massachusetts, which arguably is the most or one of the most liberal Jewish communities in the country, was bitterly divided on the topic. There was no consensus on marriage equality. Our Jewish Community Relations Council, which ended up being the first JCRC in the country to endorse marriage equality, had a very painful hours-long debate before they did finally vote to endorse marriage equality. And then slowly, one by one, various other JCRCs around the country followed suit. But it took a while. And I remember, because when marriage equality became legal in Massachusetts, there was an immediate attempt to pass a one-man, one-woman marriage constitutional amendment to the state constitution. And we embarked on a fight that lasted 3 years to ultimately defeat that proposed constitutional amendment. I remember standing in front of the Massachusetts State House holding a banner that said in large letters, "The Massachusetts Jewish community supports equal marriage." And people used to come charging up to us and shout at us and say, "How dare you stand here and say this is what Jews believe? Jews don't believe this. This isn't what the Jewish community believes." And that was true. It wasn't what the whole Jewish community believes. It was an aspirational statement, not a reflection of reality. And today, of course, especially when I talk about this in Massachusetts, people actually say to me, "Are you exaggerating? Is that really true?" Because it feels so foreign to the reality today, in which not just in Massachusetts, but nationally, we know that the vast majority of American Jews both support marriage equality and support equal rights for LGBTQ people.
Yeah, absolutely. And, obviously what you're talking about in the Jewish community is the microcosm of the world at large, right? And how the world at large was feeling about LGBTQ rights. What has changed in the last 20 years, and how has your work changed?
So as I was saying, a lot of the change has been just gradually increasing openness to engaging with the full array of issues, sexual orientation and gender diversity, understanding the need to be kind of expansive around our thinking, to think beyond binaries, both in terms of sexual orientation and in terms of gender, expansiveness in terms of engaging with people of various ages, other demographics within Jewish life, and also changes in terms of how the Jewish community is engaging. I would say in the earlier stages of our time as an organization, most of the work that we did that Jewish community leaders were open to engaging with was internal work, work around policies and programs and cultures of Jewish organizations internally. There wasn't a lot of appetite for mobilizing as Jews to take action in the public realm to advance LGBTQ rights. And we thankfully have seen an increasing shift in that regard. Today in our work to mobilize Jewish communities, both to advance positive LGBTQ rights legislation and to fight back against the surge of anti-LGBTQ legislation that we're seeing that particularly targets trans youth, we're seeing increasing numbers of Jews want to take action as Jews. I mean, so much so that nearly half of the tens of thousands of people who we've mobilized to take action to advance and to protect rights, nearly half of those people are doing so for the very first time. This is the very first time they're taking action for LGBTQ rights. So we know, for example, that 85% of American Jews, which is higher than any other ethnic or religious group, in principle support LGBTQ rights. But what we also know is that too many of those people are not yet taking action. So that's our job, to provide the tools and the encouragement and to make it easy and accessible and compelling for people to want to take action.
Can you share a little bit more about that? Can we dive deeper in terms of what kind of tools you provide to help mobilize people, and how are you activating them?
Absolutely. So we work in partnership with secular LGBTQ rights organizations, whose sole focus, unlike Keshet, is to advance and protect LGBTQ rights. Right now, because the Equality Act, which is proposed legislation that would at long last provide federal anti-discrimination protections for LGBTQ people, and a lot of people don't know that people actually are not protected on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity according to federal law in housing, in education, in healthcare, in public accommodations, in government services, et cetera, et cetera. And for 40 years, we've been trying to pass legislation to make that so. That is currently stalled in the Senate and isn't moving anywhere quickly. So we therefore have moved our focus away from that stalled federal legislation to working within states where really harmful legislation is happening. So, as an advocate, you always prefer to be working on campaigns that are about advancing legislation that expand rights, not focused on fighting against legislation that will take away your rights. But when you're under attack, that's what you need to do. And we are certainly under attack now. In 2022 alone, over 300 anti-LGBTQ pieces of legislation have been proposed, most of them targeting trans youth. It is clearly and inarguably a cynical ploy by right-wing politicians to whip up their base in advance of the upcoming elections and to hold on to power. And it's terrifying, and it's deeply, deeply sad that that they want to hold onto power to such an extent that they're willing to target people who are among the most vulnerable members of our society, children. And the kinds of legislation that we're seeing, as I'm sure people have heard, is legislation that will ban children from receiving gender affirming care. And this is healthcare that it's not a nice to have care. For many kids, this is a need to have care. This is the difference for a lot of children between harming themselves, trying to take their own lives, or not doing so. We know that more than half of all transgender young people will attempt suicide in their lifetime. And we also know that those numbers go dramatically down if two things are in place: if they have supportive families and if they have access to healthcare. And what we're seeing, for example, in Texas, as I'm sure you all know, are attempted policies that would deem parents who are supportive of their kids and give them the health care that they need, that would legally deem them child abusers and subject them to the threat of their children being taken away from them, which of course is every parent's worst nightmare and every child's worst nightmare. So those are a few of the examples of the kinds of really just heinous pieces of legislation and public policy that are out there that we are fighting against, and that we're seeing, thankfully, in the Jewish community, that when people become aware of the kinds of risks and the kinds of threats that young people in particular are facing, they want to stand up, and they're doing so. We're doing so not despite our identities as Jews, but because of our identities as Jews and our sense of accountability as Jews.
Yeah, definitely. And there's all the educational policy in Florida. I mean, there's so many places to focus on states' rights in this area. I think there's been a lot of talk in the media, obviously, with the leaked Supreme Court decision and how that is threatening the right to privacy that was in Roe v. Wade, that has also been grounds for DOMA and, gay marriage. And so, what does this mean? This possibility of overturning this right to privacy or negating it, what does it mean for DOMA and gay rights?
It's frightening. It's frightening. As I said, I do spend a lot of time in my thinking and speaking, kind of pointing out all of the reasons that we have to feel hope because of, in many ways, the breathtaking rate of change, the breathtaking pace of change that has occurred when it comes to LGBTQ rights in the last generation. And as of course we're facing in terms of reproductive rights and abortion access, we very viscerally feel and see before us the potential for generations of work that that people have fought and struggled for to be undone instantly. No one knows, of course, for sure what will happen. And a lot of political analysts are saying that, it's the same analysis that undergirds the opposition to Roe. And, Alito has been very clear that he sees the arguments for Roe as, unmoored, is the language that he uses, as unmoored from the Constitution, as not having any basis in the Constitution because the language isn't there, because it's not explicit. And of course, it wasn't. And it's such an absurd argument, and yet not, because of the power that's behind it. And so the same arguments can be applied to Obergefell, which was the decision that legalized same-sex marriage, to Lawrence v. Texas, which was the decision that made it legal for gay people to have sex and be in relationships without fear of public prosecution, and so many other aspects of gay rights. So there is a very credible fear among activists and advocates that much of what we have worked and fought for so long could be undone, very, very rapidly, by this one body of government. What can't be undone, though, is the changes that have occurred in hearts and minds. That can't be undone. The fact that the majority of Americans support the rights of same-sex couples to marry, the fact that the majority of Americans know gay people who are married, know people who are in committed relationships, see what that means. The fact that the majority of Americans support the rights of LGBTQ people to work and seek health care and go to the movies and parks and doctors' offices without fear of discrimination. All of that wasn't the case 25, 50, and more years ago. And all of that was less the case even 5 or 10 years ago. So those kinds of changes that are fundamental in people's hearts and minds, those can't be undone by Supreme Court changes, which doesn't say that lives won't be devastated, but it does mean that there is progress that we can build on.
Yeah, we have to hope for the best because it's families too now, right? It's not just couples, it's families. I have more questions for you, but we're going to try something a little new and different today to make our Crown Jewel conversation a little more interactive. Rachel?
Great. So now we would love to invite questions for Idit. If you do have a question, we're not a huge group, but just to avoid any chaos, if you could click on your reactions tab at the bottom and raise your hand, then I will know who has questions and I will ask each of you to unmute one by one. So first, actually, Barbara Dopian, I see that you put a question in the chat. Would you unmute yourself and ask your question directly?
Idit, excuse me. Do you also work with parents of gay and lesbian and all the list?
So we do. We at times have had active groups of parents of LGBTQ young people that have met. That isn't something that we're doing currently. What we do currently is we have a matching program such that if there is a parent or grandparent or any family member really who is in need of support, we can match them with someone who who's in a similar family scenario. So just last week, for example, we got a call from a grandparent of a transgender young girl who was, just having challenges understanding her granddaughter, but really wanted to continue to be in loving relationship with her granddaughter. So we matched her with another grandparent who can provide support. What we're also doing now is, and there's a lot of energy for this among both grandparents and parents of LGBTQ kids, is we're organizing parents and grandparents to take action for LGBTQ rights. And of course, nothing is more ferocious than the love of parents and grandparents when when they feel like their kids' lives are under threat. So there's a lot of energy there.
Barbara Pollard.
Barbara Pollard.
Hi, Idit. I have a daughter who works at Mount Sinai in their transgender medical and surgery center. And I was curious if you work with both trans individuals and their families who have difficult times in the beginning accepting, and then there's a lot of caregiving afterwards. Do you have any involvement in that community?
Sorry, is the question, is it about, do we provide direct services to?
I guess, in piggybacking in Barbara's question about dealing with parents of gay and lesbians, that do you work with the similar community in the trans community?
So yes, it probably would be helpful for me to back up and say what it is that we do, because I imagine that's known to some of you and not to others of you. So we don't generally provide direct support services. So for example, if a trans teen called us and said, I need a therapist. I need to find out where I can get gender affirming care. That's not, those aren't services that we provide directly, but we refer them to where they can provide services. What we do directly with LGBTQ Jewish young people is we provide access to community connection and learning both through online programs and in-person gatherings. And these are opportunities for young people to connect with peers. For many of them, it's their only opportunity to be in open and celebratory community with other LGBTQ people, certainly with other LGBTQ Jews, and to connect with mentors. Secondly, we do work directly with Jewish institutions, both staff and leaders, synagogues, day schools, youth movements, JCCs, elder serving institutions, the whole panoply of Jewish communal institutions, giving leaders the tools that they need to advance LGBTQ equality and belonging within those institutions. And then thirdly, we work, as I was referencing earlier, to mobilize Jewish communities to take action for LGBTQ rights. So those are the areas in which we work. Because we are, at this point, the largest organization that focuses on LGBTQ issues in Jewish life, we do get very frequent requests for direct services. So we do a lot of referrals outward.
Thanks, Idit. Marilyn Gottlieb.
Thank you. Idit, are there any plans with Keshet or in conjunction with other organizations to, if the Alito decision is the decision of the court on abortion, to try to figure out some other arguments that can be made to support what we used to call the right of privacy, as something other than a constitutionally grounded right, but some other right, because I think there are going to be opportunities to bring lawsuits because there are lots of state laws now. And I don't know if people are thinking about what possible grounds they can use to bring those lawsuits.
Yes, people are thinking and more than thinking are laying the legal groundwork for those lawsuits. I mean, it's not Keshet because we're not a legal advocacy organization, but thankfully, we have organizations like Lambda and GLAD with 1A, which have long been spearheading the legal fight for LGBTQ rights in this country, and won all of these cases that we hope will not be overturned. But if they are, then the lawsuits will be ready to be filed that day. We will be fighting within every state legislature, or not within every, probably not Massachusetts, New York, and California, and a handful of others, but within most other state legislatures around the country.
Thank you.
I have lots more questions, but I want to make space. Does anyone else have any other questions? Well, let me ask Idit one more, and you can think about it. Just raise your hand if you want to jump in. Idit, obviously, we're coming out of the last 2 years, which have been, so strange for all of us. But I'm guessing also for you and the communities that you work with, what have you learned about your youth during the pandemic?
I'm so glad you asked that question, Rachel, because I'll never say that I'm glad that the last 2 years happened as they did, but I'm so grateful for something that we learned, and I'm sure that Miriam Kabakov, who's here from Eshel, would say the same thing, that so many of us who lead LGBTQ organizations that work with youth learned, which is how many youth are out there for whom secretly going online is their only way to access support and community. Prior to COVID, almost all of Keshet's work with youth was in-person work. And our hallmark program has been the Keshet Teen Shabbaton, which Eshel co-sponsors, which brings together teens in different regions around the country for these wonderful, immersive, really transformative for a lot of kids, weekend experiences. And at every Shabbaton, there are always a small number of kids who kind of proudly and slyly tell us that they tricked their parents into allowing them to come by telling their parents that they were going on a BBYO Shabbaton or a USY Shabbaton, because BBYO and USY are co-sponsors of our Shabbaton. And so they just kind of showed them that logo, and that's how they were able to go. So we always had a sense that, of course, there were kids whose parents weren't supportive. Well, when the world shut down mid-March 2020, and we had to cancel the Shabbaton for which we had 80 kids registered that was supposed to happen that weekend, the weekend of March 15th, and turning on a dime as we all did, transformed our youth program into an online program. What we discovered was that in addition, of course, to reaching exponentially more youth than we were reaching by only convening kids in person, we discovered that we were suddenly reaching many youth who were literally taking their laptops into their bedroom closets, putting their AirPods in and whispering for fear of their parents hearing them.
Great.
And saying to us,
Any thoughts to do something like this?
and saying to us, I am so grateful that you are finally offering programs online, because I've been asking my parents for the last 2 years, the last 3 years, the last 5 years to please let me go to a Keshet Shabbaton, and they won't let me go. And now I am trapped at home with a hostile family, and all I can do is sit here with my closet door. I mean, the heavy-handed metaphor that is so real for these kids. All I can sit here with my closet door in front of me, whispering, but this is my lifeline.
And who are those kids?
They are kids. They are kids from every Jewish walk of life. This is not a sliver of the right-wing Orthodox world in a rural part of a red state. These are kids in Manhattan. These are kids in San Francisco, and kids in rural Texas. But really, I mean, they are kids from every Jewish denomination and no denomination, and from every region of the country.
Yeah, we still have a long way to go. I know we had a question from someone who couldn't ask it in person. Jamie, we had a dialed in question. Do you want to ask that?
Dialed in.
Dialed in.
So this question is from our board member, Stephanie Gary, and she said that the relevant question is how comfortable we are when it comes to understanding, accepting, and addressing those in our community who are more diverse, that about language being impactful and how we can learn to create a more inclusive community for everybody. Is that a question? Did I just ask a question?
Yeah,
or did
there
I
was a
just say
how. There
something?
was a how. How can we do this?
How, Idit, how?
And sorry, was that a question, how from the perspective of JWFNY or more broadly?
I think more broadly.
More broadly, okay. So I mean, the how is through education, it's through learning, it's through engaging with people, it's through understanding the truths of people's lives. I mean, there's technical hows that come through in the trainings that Keshet provides. There's the hows that have to do with understanding the texture of people's experiences and identities that happens through engaging with LGBTQ people and understanding people's life experiences and challenges and triumphs. There are different aspects of what to look for in the fabric of an organization. I mean, one of the questions that I will often ask community leaders is, think about a 45-year-old lesbian, think about a 30-year-old trans man, think about LGBTQ people of various ages and demographics walking into your building or clicking on your website and seeing your homepage. What does that person see that tells them this is a community that knows that I exist? What does that person see that goes further than that, that tells them this is a community that not only knows that I exist, this is a community that embraces me as a key part of this community. This is a community that will fight for me. This is a community that will stand up for me when my rights are under attack. What is the language that they see? What are the visuals that they see? What are the signs? What are the signposts that direct them to a sense that this is a community where I can find my home?
Yeah, Idit, I'm listening to so much about what you're saying about this inclusivity, about our language, about and I'm thinking of all the parallels that we are now seeing, with people of color, and particularly with Jews of color, and how we're needing to shift. Once again, the Jewish community started out, how is this a Jewish problem? I mean, there are people who just aren't realizing the full depth and breadth of our Jewish community. And so much of what you've been applying for the last 20 years is what continues to be applied now to many people who feel marginalized in our community. And so I think it's good for us to zoom out and think about that when we're thinking about this language and inclusivity as well. So just, I see all those parallels as you're saying everything you're saying. We're coming to the end of our time, and I have two big questions I want to conclude with. One is, where do you see the future of Keshet, and for you personally as a leader?
Sure. So I always say that I see a future with our reaching the point where Keshet is with great joy writing our obsolescence plan and executing it. I really believe that day will come. When I think about how much exists today that I could not have dreamed of 20 years ago, I just, like, even with all of the challenges that are before us, I fully believe that it's possible. 2 days ago, I was invited to be the speaker at my 7-year-old's Jewish day school to celebrate the beginning of Pride Month. And they had a school-wide assembly and a special Hallel service because it was Rosh Chodesh, and they invited the kids and the teachers to dress in rainbow colors. And I never would have dreamed that would happen at a day school or my kids' day school, and that I would be treated like an honored guest because of the work that I do for Keshet, and that the day would, the event would culminate in the kids singing Hallel and marching in a pride parade through the halls of the school. So when I think of something like that, it gives me great hope and real certainty that we will reach a day when we will no longer see the need for Keshet in the Jewish community. In terms of me personally, that's a question that I get a lot since I just celebrated my 20th anniversary at Keshet. I continue to feel really inspired and energized by this work, and engaged. Thankfully or not, there is always a new challenge that we are facing. Our staff is in amazing shape now, and I love my staff so much. And am so excited to be on this team and to be leading this team and to be taking us in new directions. So I'm not sure. I'll share that all the JWF and Y folks know that when I applied for the program, I said, I've been at Keshet for then I guess it was 17 years, and I'm thinking about next steps, and I want support in continuing to do that, and I'm going to continue to do that. I mean, I'm 49 years old. I expect there are other things I will do with my life. As long as I feel like I'm continuing to feel inspired and am able to inspire others and lead effectively, this is work that I want to continue to do.
That's amazing. Well, because you mentioned it, it's a great place for us to finish with the collective. And, what has that experience been like for you? How has it impacted your leadership since you started with us?
Absolutely. So I'd say most deeply, it's about the other women in the collective, and the staff with whom I've had the pleasure of coming into deeper relationship with at JWFNY and the leadership of the board, who JWFNY has also given us the opportunity to engage with. Being in relationship with people who whose current professional trajectories really span the gamut from just beginning a new venture to completing a long time venture, to being in a place of struggle, to being in a place of absolute soaring. We're all in such different places, but where we come together, and I think it's quite remarkable that this is possible, given that we haven't, because of COVID, had the opportunity to be together in real life, and most of us have never met one another, which it still surprises me when I remember that now, but we haven't. Most of us don't know one another beyond Zoom, and yet where we all come together is in the deep caring that has been cultivated amongst us, and the deep sense of connection. And we have seen when there is someone among us who is in a hard place, people are literally willing to drop what they're doing and jump in their cars and drive a couple hundred miles to show up for that person, and physically be there for her. And for me personally, there have been so many times, either within the space of the whole group, or in one-on-one relationships, or in small groups that we've convened outside of our formal gathering spaces, where I have known these are people with whom I can speak in trust and openness, and know that that people will respond to me with deep caring and respect, and will hold me as I hold them, to travel on this journey, and when we feel like we're on shaky ground, to move together until we get to a firmer place.
That's so beautiful. And I hope for you that those are lifelong relationships that you can continue to lean on and gain support from, as you move forward. It's such a pleasure to have you in our collective. It's such a privilege to support the work that you do as a leader. Thank you so much for being in conversation with me. I'm going to turn it back over to Rachel.
Great. Yes, Idit says that so casually, but actually she was one of the ones who really stepped up for another collective member who was struggling. So thank you, Idit. We're so lucky to have you in our community, in our network.
Yeah.
Someone is unmuted. Thank you, Idit, also for taking the time to share your wisdom and your extraordinary story with us today. And Rachel, thank you for leading us through this conversation. Thank you to you all for all of your questions. We don't have to hope that things will be different when we have leaders like Idit to guide us. In the United States, all over the world, we actually can believe that change is happening and will happen. We are so inspired by Idit's leadership and her extraordinary story, and we hope that you are as well. If you've been with us before, you know that we always like to share a few actions that you can take. If you want to do something right now, Eva will be putting a link in the chat for you to call on your senators to support the Equality Act, which will extend federal civil rights protections to include sexual orientation and gender identity. We'll email out more to you tomorrow about all the incredible things Keshet is doing that you can support. We offer these sessions at no cost to you, but if you find value in what we're doing, we hope that you will consider 2 donations today, one to Keshet and another to JWFNY. Today is our last crown jewel conversation of our program year and our last one with cohort 2. We will resume in the fall with cohort 3, and we will send you a schedule of all of those over the summer, so please look out for them. Thank you for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you soon. Have a great summer. Happy Pride Month.
Happy Pride. Thank you.